The market doesn't know what keeps you up at night. It doesn't know when you want to retire, and it doesn't know how old you are. The simple truth is, the market doesn't care. But if you care, you've tuned into the right place. You're listening to Investor Resources, bringing clarity to the confusing world of finance. Here are your hosts of Investor Resources, Don Creech and Perry Sykes.
I'm Don Creech.
And I'm Perry Sykes, and welcome to the Investor Resources Podcast.
One of the issues that we have spent time talking about for years, basically, off and on anyway, since the early 2000s, when we were doing seminars and then webinars, which is we're doing now, is the subject of demographics. Because as the adage goes, demographics is destiny. And the classic case of that is Japan. For those of you who aren't familiar with this, let me give you a brief history. After the war, we know Japan was decimated and they needed to rebuild the country. The country decided that they didn't have enough money to rebuild the industrial base or businesses and restore all the damage and raise children. So they basically encouraged people not to have children. And they built a brand new economy. They went from a totalitarian system, an archaic system, to a modern consumer society. The problem is that not having babies means that as the parents get older and move into retirement, they don't have children to watch over them, take care of them, support them. And that has led Japan to become a leader in robotics. Their hospital care and their elder care is dominated by robotic care. I'm not going to go into that subject today. We see the same thing coming to play in China today because China had a one-child policy and they have figured out that was a mistake. They now have millions of people, elderly people, without families. I mean, it's a massive problem. And in the West, we're facing a similar kind of transition where we're having fewer and fewer children. And we've seen that as we move from baby boomers post-war who came back to a country that was not damaged at all, had been the industrial base for winning the war against communism and totalitarianism in Japan. We went back to work and we had people coming back from the military service. And guess what? They fell in love very rapidly. They got married very rapidly. They had babies very rapidly. And as we moved into the 50s and the 60s, there were insufficient schools for all the babies that were coming along. There were insufficient teachers. There were insufficient housing. They got into high school, and guess what? The cycle started all over. There weren't enough high schools or teachers. And then the colleges. And then they got out of college. Those kids got out of college, and they're getting married. There's not enough houses. That's not our problem. Well, we do have a problem not having enough houses today. So those are the baby boomers that came out of that population boom right after World War II. Well, the baby boomers got educated and they're looking at the cost of education and saying, it's pretty expensive. They had fewer children. And we ended up with the Gen X. Gen X was a label that was assigned because there were so few of them in the country that retailers said, how are we going to stay in business? We don't have all these people buying goods from us. It was an economic downsizing problem because there were fewer consumers. And the Gen X, a lot of them were single kids. They didn't have siblings. And the ones that did, the family size was smaller. You didn't typically get 4, 5, 6, 8 kids in a household. Now, Perry, you're an exception. You and Ruby.
It's only 5. We got 5. Yeah, it's not, we don't have 8. Don't say that. But we've got, lots of aunts, uncles, cousins, lots. And it makes a big difference in an economy. It makes a huge difference with the baby boomers and that huge population boom we had. That's a whole lot of stuff people have to go out and buy, and it's not voluntary stuff. You got to feed and clothe 5 kids. That makes a big difference if you got to feed and clothe a single child. So there's a lot of stuff, not to mention where's that going to happen, right? All of a sudden you need a house, you need a backyard, and all of that really slowed down with the Gen Xers, and then the millennials after them pretty much just put the brakes on it. Everything got delayed. The millennials came online and they were like, no, I'm going to get a good job. I'm going to stay single. I'm going to live downtown in a city. I'm going to not own a car. I'm not buying into this game. I'm not doing this. And for a while, that was what was happening. That was what was happening. But with with demographics over time, those kinds of things resolve themselves. And sure enough, millennials are getting married. Millennials are having kids. Millennials are moving back out of the city because they need that backyard now because, Junior and his little sibling don't want to play on the sidewalk and nowhere else. And so those kinds of things are finally happening. They're finally occurring in the millennial generation. And people had started to think maybe it wasn't going to happen. Maybe they were never going to do that. But sure enough, time took over, and time's undefeated. And sure enough, people heard the clock ticking and decided, well, if we're going to have kids, it's time to have kids. And we should go ahead and get married. And all of those things are occurring step by step. It's a good sign for our economy.
Well, and you think about the economics of it. When once you start a family, you're buying baby clothes and strollers and stuff, and it doesn't take long, and it's not baby clothes, it's toddlers clothes, and then you end up with a tricycle, and then you end up with a bicycle, then you end up with a bigger bicycle, and pretty soon, hey Dad, I want a car, at least let me drive, but now I want a car. And then it's, what are you going to do for school and college expenses? They get out, and you buy a bigger home along the way, as you mentioned. You reach a point where you say, I don't think it's safe for my kids to be playing out in the street. I mean, you got these people that aren't paying attention to the children in the neighborhood. You want a better neighborhood, better security. All these things generate economic activity, which keep the economy going, which is why economists look at housing as such a critical factor for economic progress in our country.
Right.
You go out and you buy a home. Let's say your first home, you can't quite afford a brand new one, so you buy a home that somebody's selling, and you move in there and you look at the carpet and say, golly, this carpet is orange. Where'd that come from? Well, frankly, that came from the early 70s.
I was about to say, what's wrong with that? Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
You look at it needs painting, and so you replace the carpet. You look at the kitchen, and pretty soon you say, the appliances here, the built-ins, they're old, and I can't clean them. So you buy a new wall oven, or you buy a new stovetop, you buy a new washer and dishwasher. But all that stuff is economic activity. If you do it yourself, you're down at Lowe's and Home Depot or True Value. If you're hiring a contractor, maybe you're buying some higher end stuff. But it generates economic activity upon which the entire economy responds. Everything that you buy to replace in that home gets delivered by a trucker. He's using diesel oil. It's going in, it goes from manufacturer to some distributor to a warehouse to your local store, and either you take it home or your contractor takes it home. But every one of those steps along the way is, as we now know, a potential point of inflation. If costs are rising, every one of those points of transfer has to raise the hike their prices, and we're going to pay for it. But if we don't have inflation, what we get is just simply everybody along the way is getting some piece of economic activity. Now, one of the big problems has been with this delay start, waiting so long to get married and waiting to have children. One of the major economic concerns has been, is what's going to happen here? This isn't normal. Well, the normal cycle is starting, it's just pushing it further downstream, which is a problem for the economy. But one of the things that is encouraging is that, like the Gen X and the millennials, are beginning to catch up to their parents. the Gen X was such a small generation, people didn't think that there'd be enough to keep the economy going. But the millennial generation is bigger than the boomer generation. Now,
Correct.
it's not in such a compressed time period as the boomer birth rate was. It's spread over
Right.
more time, but the actual numbers are larger. So if you're worried about the U.S. economy surviving, quit thinking of it in terms of next year or the year beyond. We still have a reasonable birth rate. It's below replacement on the short-term basis. The last couple of years have been below replacement rate. But with all these millennials and the family formation, the next 20 years in our economy has the prospect of being very, very prosperous. Now, I have a graph here that we pulled from the article that you found, Perry. And this graph shows the baby boomers are out here as they're approaching their 80s. They're in their 90s, actually. Like the silent generation is in their hundreds. There aren't many of them, but up there. But that's an increasing number. And then we have the Gen X. This is tracking ahead of where parents were at the same age. Home ownership rates for each generation. And here's the millennials, who many economists thought they're never going to buy a home. You know, they're going to stay renters downtown because that's where the party is. Well, once you have kids, you think I can't party every night because I got to find a babysitter, and there aren't any babysitters anymore. So
It changes. That's right.
So now we move
And they're good at that.
move into the suburbs, and but this is hopeful. Here's Gen Z coming up behind them. This is all very positive because eventually they buy houses. And we're saying, yeah, but we got all these high interest rates. That will not last for long. I mean,
Correct.
high interest rates are temporary. When I bought I bought my first home on a real estate contract, and that interest rate was about 7.5%. That was a used home, but the second home was brand new, and I paid 10 and 5/8. And my mortgage guy said 10 and 5/8, that's a really good rate.
Right.
And I know that because I had a client who had actually quite a few years before, had actually financed his home at 21%.
21%. Can you imagine that rate today? People would lose their minds. You know, people are still trying to get used to not paying 3%, you know, which was crazy low rates. And like you said, your first house contract was 7.5%. It's like, that's what it is today, you know, so right in that range. So it's like, that's much more normal than the 3%. That's as abnormal as the 21%.
That's actually, you're right about that. Historically, home mortgages are somewhere between 5.5% and 7% over long periods of time.
There you go.
But we saw those very, very cheap rates, and we think they're taking advantage of us today. That's actually a more representative financing cost. We get money stabilized at a more traditional level than we've had over these last couple of years with pandemic government interference, screwing things up.
Yep.
It takes time to stabilize the economy to market forces again. The government doesn't usually know how to do things well. There's some things they must do that we can't do for ourselves, but the market will determine appropriate prices. That's going to adjust housing prices. It's going to adjust mortgage rates as we get a little bit more into this stabilization period. But anyway, back to the baby boomers. I mean, the boomers and the millennials, the Gen X along the way, it's following this demographics, this destiny pattern. It's just the delay that's caused some problems. And one of the things that has changed, let me move on to another graph here. I'll take this one down and put this one up. This shows assets by generation. Of course, the longer you've owned a home over the last, let's say, 20 or 30 years. I mean, I spoke with someone recently who's been in their home. They bought one home. They've been in it 30 years. Well, guess what's happened to the price of that house?
Right.
It's gone up substantially. So when we look at that, real estate's a major part of their financial net worth. And
Right.
as we get into younger generations, they haven't had time for real estate appreciation to have the same kind of impact, but they're catching up.
And it will.
This
Yep. Takes time.
this is positive for the health of our economy. We have external forces that come in from time to time, like we have the oil shipping disruption that's going on in the Red Sea that's related to the Hamas attack on Israel. We don't know when that will end, and we don't know when the next one will start. But as far as our country is concerned, we have the population moving through the demographic cycle that's extremely positive. So I hear people say, well, I don't know if I want to have any more kids or any kids at all because look how bad things are. Well, things are bad in every generation for a period of time.
Yep.
But we as the United States have the making of a strong global leadership economy for decades to come. Don't give up hope on it. I don't know. It sounds like I got excited about that. I mean,
And you're right, but you're right. You're right. We're in a good position demographically, and that's going to drive economics. And so the big picture from 40,000 feet is we're in pretty good shape. And we can mess it up a little here and a little there, but the overarching power of that much consumer spending is going to keep us looking pretty strong, as you said, now for decades to come. That's a good thing.
it is positive, and so we get concerned about how our kids got to struggle. I struggled a lot when I was in my 20s and early 30s trying to figure out how to raise a family and get my feet on the ground and become a responsible parent and husband and business owner. All those things take time. You have to make mistakes, and hopefully you learn from your mistakes. If you don't, you're going to repeat them. I think I hear my dad talking.
Right. There you go. That's what they say. It doesn't matter how hard you try, you're still going to become your parents. So there you go.
That's right. But all of that is good, strong economic foundation for what we have. We have to adjust to the pandemic. Basically, we have to work back into normalization. That's going to take time. We use process for managing a process of making decisions that we just do over and over and over again on a regular basis, instead of guessing at what's going to happen or how soon anything's going to happen. It's what's going on right now, and what do we know from this, and what are the probabilities for it to continue or change. And from that, you make a decision and you live another day. And on your time clock, on your calendar clock, you review those same decisions, you follow the same process. You end up with a repeatable program to make decisions without responding as best you can to the headline news that's designed to mess with your brain.
Correct.
You don't want to be an investor and have the headlines messing with your brain. You have any points that we need to cover here, Perry, before we wrap?
We're good. We're good, Don.
Okay, well, if you want to contact us and have us take a look at your portfolio or talk about what we do relative to your situation, contact information is right down here below. Subscribe to our podcast. We have another webinar coming up on stock market update. Sign up for that. Just simply go to the link for our website, and you can register there. It's a fairly easy click and register. We don't sell your information. Maintain your privacy. Have a great day. Subscribe to us, and we'll be back with another recording soon.